going back to the opening and, the wonderful visual of Winona Ryder's head just sticking out of the ground. And it's a great piece of grounding for the tone of the film, like right off the bat.
Quite literally.
And it also introduces, the Heathers kind of as this one functioning creature almost, where it's like the three of them need each other and how they play off of each other. And I did talk about, again, the themes of the film, allowing your id to, kind of run wild. I do think, the Freudian trio is very much represented in the Heathers, and that, they need each other, and the fact that Yellow Heather McNamara, who's kind of, in a lot of respect, the least consequential of the three, is the ego. She's kind of, she's still very much a Heather in that sense, but she's probably the most neutral, the most kind of sensible, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Then you have Heather Chandler, the red Heather, is the superego. She is the crazy narcissistic bitch who sits in judgment of everybody around, is kind of the leader, and is kind of, oh my God, I'm just going to trample over everybody. Then you have the late great Shannon Doherty as Heather Duke, the green Heather. And I think she is the id of the Heathers. In the sense of, like, it may not seem this way because she starts the movie out so meek and so timid. And when we think of, like, the id and the id monster, as it were, we think of this bombastic force of nature that's going to go through every little thing. And just, again, we can mistake, Heather Chandler for the id as opposed to the superego. However, and I thought about this upon my second viewing of the film, all three Heathers have a sense of self-loathing to them, whether they project it or otherwise. And I didn't think about that until the scene at the college party when Heather Chandler takes Veronica to the college party to try and get, we're going to score some college guys and this is a cool thing to do. And it's kind of lame and sad and a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
But the scene after Heather Chandler has sex with one of the co-eds, and she's in the bathroom afterwards, and she's freshening up, and you're thinking, all right, she's just freshening up. She takes a big old gulp of water, and she spits that water back out at herself in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you feel that self-loathing too. So, yes, I feel like as a result, I came to the conclusion that Heather Duke is kind of the id, and that kind of creates the trio as this one kind of Freudian unit, as it were. And I think that opening scene does a good job of establishing that dynamic as well.
That's so fascinating to me that you thought about it that way, because it makes perfect sense when you explain it, of course. But just the fact that I didn't think about it that way until you explain it. And I now have to watch the movie for the fifth time or whatever it is so that I can really think about all that, because that is brilliant. But yeah, for some reason, I didn't think of the Heathers, the three, as like a three-headed monster with the same sort of body. In the Freudian way that you're talking about, I kind of thought about them as just this image of how all of these sort of high statusy, and not necessarily socioeconomic status. I mean, statusy as in popularity, the ultimate currency that I think dominates at the end of the day in the high school sort of landscape.
And here's the funny thing too, and I'll let you finish your thought, but there's also something about, because he said status, not just in terms of like status as in, who you are and what you represent and all this stuff, but like they represent in a lot of respects the status quo of that time, I think. And we'll get to that a little bit more, where it's like they're the thing that kind of controls the order and how it's always been to a degree.
Yes.
And you have Veronica coming in who is trying to fit into the order of things, but she doesn't quite fit into that as well as she maybe could.
Absolutely. And it also seems to be very much like, in that way, it's a sort of political or allegory for, reactionary versus progressive. I think that's very strong there as well. That's implied.
It's a scene outside of the convenience store with JD where she almost makes it sound like they're not really my friends, they're like my colleagues, and our job is being popular and stuff.
Yeah. And of course, that's when she says, I don't even like my friends. And he says,
Yes.
I don't like them either. But I was just going to say, I thought of the Heathers more as like this image or portrait of the fact that all of these high popularity, high status girls or people, even though they're different, are generally interchangeable, right? Like almost like not that political figures are not consequential in their own right, but it's almost like a political office or like a public servant's office, the office of the inspector general, the office of something else, where the established role is set, and agreed upon, and there's a rule book for it. It comes with a manual. This is what that person does. This is what the Secretary of Defense does. This is what the treasurer does. And then different people step into that role, and even though they have their own autonomy of thinking maybe about certain issues, and they have their own experience, and they bring ideas to the table, and they listen to people, and they might be leaning left or leaning right or whatever it is, but there's still something about the Secretary of Defense that's the Secretary of Defense.
The functionality of the position.
Right. You can draw a line from secretary to secretary to secretary through the functionality of the position. Right. And the functionality of the position is like that's the purely administrative part of the thing. Right. That's this movie kind of separates the role of the thing from the person assuming the role. Right. The character of the person and even the intentions of the person. Because, and this is where all the political allegory, I think, goes crazy, especially when JD starts to convince Heather, whatever the second Heather is.
Heather Duke.
Thank you, Duke.
Shannon Doherty.
Shannon Doherty, exactly. When he convinces Shannon, it was Christian Slater, of course, in a brilliant performance, convinces her to do, through extortion, essentially, to have everyone sign the petition for their own debts. That's someone coming in and lobbying, right? And using that position in order to get what they want in the end, right? So that's what I mean by like, oh, the office doesn't necessarily have to do with the person. And that's where all the complications of bureaucracy and politics come in. But I think that the movie does a really good job of that.
It does.
And it's fascinating. So that's what I thought that these three Heathers initially were sort of representing. Like a Heather is a Heather is a Heather. Yeah. Eventually, this one is more bitchy in that way. This one sort of empathizes for you a little bit in that way. But they have the same answer to similar questions. Why did you hit my ball out of the croquet yard? Why? Because I could. And she learned it from the other one.
Yes.
She learned it from her predecessor. And all of a sudden, that learned behavior of what this position is supposed to be overtakes and trumps, for lack of a better word, the person that you were. Your critical thinking, your individual voice. It takes over and it vitiates all of the things that are supposed to be working independently, and it becomes just another ploy to get the thing done that's trying to be done, that's trying to get done, that's masterminded by some component that's not even part of the government, let's say. No names. But there are always going to be people that do that, and businesses and other interests and things like that. And that's what I think is so clearly spelled out here through allegory, through this simple high school class and these simple students that could be kind of in any high school movie. But what he does with it is show you what the greater context is. And that's one of the ways that he does it. What do you think about that?